Breath is both an autonomic nervous system activity, one that just happens. Thankfully, we don't have to think about breathing. We don't have to think, oh, I have to inhale now and exhale now. But it's also one that we can intentionally manipulate. And because of that, it makes breath both a powerful regulator and a powerful activator. Many of us do not pay attention to our breath, and breathing is one of the experiences that is often recommended to people to help return to calm. And depending on how your system has been shaped, being invited to look at your breath or breathe in a different way or control your breath can be very dysregulating rather than regulating. And you want to honor the wisdom of your nervous system as we're going through these practices, and not make up a story that is a self-critical, shaming, blaming story that, oh, breath works for everybody but doesn't for me. Because again, breath can work when it's done in the way that works for your nervous system. So we're going to play with breath, and we're going to play with sighing. And I have found that sighing is often a way that if breath practices are challenging, sighing can be a resourcing experience. So to do this, what I'd like us to do first is simply just notice breath. Not changing it in any way, just notice. So take a moment and just notice that you are breathing. And then I'm going to invite you to reflect by using this sentence: when I notice my breath, and fill that in. When I notice my breath, what happens? Wisdom about noticing the breath is by simply noticing it. It changes by getting a bit deeper and slower. So it may be that when I notice my breath, I feel a bit uneasy. Or it may be when I notice my breath, I feel at ease, right? So take a moment and fill that in for yourself. When I just notice my breath, what happens? So then if we move to a more general exploration of breath and biology, in general, a longer exhale brings more safety and regulation. So let's try that for a moment, and let's just have an emphasis on the exhale. And again, a reflection question: when I focus on my exhalation, what happens? The theory would tell us that it brings more calm and regulation. It slows and it brings more anchoring in that place of safety. And yet for you, it may bring a different response. So we're getting to know our own biology, our own way of using breath. So again, let's take another breath and focus on the exhale. And you might fill in that sentence again: when I focus on my exhalation, what happens? So for me, as I just did that the first time, it felt like I was still in a state of a bit more attention. And the second time I did it, I felt, oh, I'm more here. I can just be. So another way we can play with breath is resistance breathing. And the way I like to think about resistance breathing is by blowing bubbles, right? Because it brings a bit of fun to what can also be an activating experience. So we can imagine blowing bubbles. You know, you may want to go out and buy some bubbles after this, but let's just imagine blowing bubbles now. And so, because to blow bubbles, to blow through that bubble wand, you have to have a long, slow exhalation through pursed lips. And the pursed lips brings the resistance breathing. It's like blowing through a straw is another way to think about it. That's also resistance breathing, right? So imagine now, I'm going to imagine blowing through a bubble wand, a stream of bubbles. And imagine doing that. And just notice what happens. So for me, it brings, when I imagine blowing bubbles, I feel a bit of joy arriving. So see what happens for you when you imagine the resistance breathing. So another way that we use breath to regulate is with sighing. And sighing is something that we spontaneously do many times an hour. And now that you recognize sighing, you may notice you're sighing more often. The science of sighing tells us that when we sigh, there's a momentary interruption of a state of our biology. Something shifts, just interrupts for a moment, and of our thinking. So sighing is an incredibly powerful experience and is something that we normally do all the time. The thing we want to be careful about when we begin to use sighing is that we often make meaning about sighing. So I'm going to guide you through 4 kinds of sighing and invite you to make this a practice that you bring into your world. I would invite you to teach the people around you about sighing, because think for a moment what happens when you are around someone and they sigh. And we then feel something and we make up a story. Oh, I'm boring. Oh, they don't want to be with me. Oh, they're frustrated. Oh, they're despairing. It brings up a story. And so the story we really would like it to bring up for the people around us is, oh, she's using sighing as a moment to regulate in a way. So let's move through 4 kinds of sighing. Sighing with despair, with frustration, with relief, and with contentment. And I'm going to start with a sigh of despair, because that's that experience of being in that building block of dorsal energy, right, of collapse. And when we sigh in despair, it's a way that breath begins to bring just a bit of energy back to our nervous system, energy back so we can begin to feel again. So I'm going to sigh in despair, and I'm going to invite you all to practice your own sigh of despair. What does it sound like? I close my eyes. I sink inward. That's the experience of despair, and the sigh is one that's not very loud, although sighs are experienced audibly. But my sigh of despair is not very loud. And I can feel the sigh is also an exhale, right? So I can feel the exhale and I can hear it. So go ahead and find your own sigh of despair. And then let's find a sigh of frustration, which is also an exhale, but it's a noisy one. The sigh of frustration that comes from that overwhelming chaotic energy is noisy. Right? We've got this sigh of frustration. So for you, again, find that sigh of frustration. What does that feel like to you? What happens here? Sigh of frustration, remembering as you sigh in frustration, it's a momentary interruption of that frustration and a momentary interruption of the thoughts that go along with it. Gives the nervous system a chance to breathe for just a moment in a different way. And now let's have a sigh of relief. A sigh of relief that, oh yes, I'm finally feeling more regulated and organized and safe in my nervous system again. A sigh of relief. So go ahead and sigh a sigh of relief. Notice what happens for you. And then finally, a sigh of contentment. I'm here. I'm anchored in safety in my nervous system. And I know I can stay here for a while. Right, contentment. To find your own sigh of contentment. So sighing is a way to find safety in your nervous system. And we can do it in a number of different ways. We can notice when we sigh in the ordinary flow of a day. Right? So as you're going through the rest of this with me, you might notice, oh, I just sighed. Oh, I just sighed. And remember, this is my nervous system helping me in this moment. And we can also create a practice of stopping and sighing. So when we know I am so frustrated right now, you can stop and sigh a sigh of frustration. And know, oh, I'm helping my nervous system regulate. I especially love to do this, the sigh of relief when I find that safety, and a sigh of contentment when I stay there. So you may decide that works for you as well, or you may really enjoy your sighs of frustration, or even your sighs of despair, right? So stop and notice as you sigh, and intentionally sigh to partner with your nervous system to find some safety.